no matter what size you're making, this is the first step you'll want to do in setting up your loom. Whether you're using a round loom or an adjustable loom. You want to determine what your first peg is for your first stitch, and you'll find your center peg. I'm going to count in 4 pegs on each side and mark those. This is where I'm going to form my toe and my heel. So this will be the wide pocket, and I like to have a more rounded toe, so instead of doing exact thirds, I go just 1 less than a third. So I have my 4 here, and then I have 6 in the middle and 4 on this side. And for the heel, I'm going to be using a deep pocket heel, and that helps to just cradle your foot into the sock and hold it a little bit better. So for that, I'm going to be measuring from my center to my first peg on this half of the loom, and I'm going to go in thirds for that. So the areas between these pegs and these pegs will be GSR rows or stitches, and that will decrease and then increase again for our toe shaping. And when we do our heel, we're going to start here. We're going to knit all the way around to here, and then back up to here, and then back. So we'll be working through these pegs. So the pegs from here to here are going to be GSR'd for our heel, and from here to here for our heel. So to start, you want to take your yarn and you want to go ahead and drop the end into your loom and anchor it down. You don't have to do this, but it does help just keep that tail out of the way. Then after you do that, if you know where your first peg is, then you'll know where your last peg is. So this is going to be the last peg, and that's where you want to start. So you take your yarn up and you go around the last peg. And you go around the first peg, and then the second peg, and you just keep going back and forth, just wrapping around the front of each of the pegs that are opposite of each other. And this is a little different when you're using an adjustable loom like I have here versus a round loom, but it works the same way. As long as you go back and forth, just wrapping the next peg over, it'll be fine. And this turned around. Okay. When you go to wrap your middle peg, you'll notice that you're done wrapping all of the pegs, so this one will just float the yarn in front of, like this. And that will wrap that peg and get ready to knit the next one. So we're going to go ahead and knit back to our first peg just on this half of the loom. And here we are to the last peg. And you just go ahead and knit that over and try not to pull that out of your anchor. If you do, then just retighten it back down. And we're at the first peg. So we're going to purl to our peg right before our middle peg. And every time we work in this direction, we'll be purling. Okay, and there we purled to the stitch right before our middle stitch. With this stitch, we're going to German short row it. So it's a 2-part technique. So what you're going to do is the first part you're going to knit the stitch that you want to short row. Then you're going to bring the yarn down to the side and you're going to pull it around the front of the peg. You can see that that gives you what looks like a double loop where the working yarn goes through that stitch. Now that peg has been short rowed. And we can continue working the new direction. We've turned and short rowed this peg. So we want to knit back since we're moving in this new direction, the opposite direction, and we're doing all garter stitches. This round or row will be knit. And we're back to our first peg, and the first peg is the one we want to short row. So the first part of the technique is to go ahead and knit off the peg and then bring the working yarn around the side and back around the front and give it a tug to short row that peg. Now since we're going back in this direction, we'll be purling. We're going to purl our way back to the stitch right before the one that we short rowed. This is the stitch that we short rowed the last row, so now we're going to short row the one right before it. So the first step is to knit, and the second step is to pull the working yarn back around in front and tug on that stitch. And then we'll be working our way back around to the next stitch that we short row on the other side. You're going to continue to do this until you've short rowed these 4 pegs on this side and these 4 pegs on the front side. And now that's the last one short rowed on this side. So now it's time to increase. So what we're going to do is knit back and knit off our last one that we short rowed on this side. And then when we come back, we'll knit off the last one we did on this side. And back and forth until all of them have been knit off. And here we are to the last German short row on this side. We're going to go ahead and knit that as regular. And the short rowed ones are a little bit tighter, so it might take a little work to get those over. And then we're going to come around the back of the peg, not around the front again, but around the back. We're going to knit back. And here we are to the last German short rowed peg on this side. So we're going to go ahead and knit that off. And leaving our working yarn in the back of the peg, we're going to come around and start purling back to the other side. And here we are to the next one. We're going to go ahead and knit that over. And now we're back to our first peg and the last German short rowed peg. So I'm going to go ahead and knit over. We're going to start our first round of knitting. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and purl all the way around until we come back to our first peg, and then we'll begin a knit round. And we'll alternate knit and purl and knit and purl until our sock is the length that we want it to be. Before I go further, I'm going to go ahead and place a pin or one of these markers around the loops at the front and the middle. So when we go to close up this toe, it'll be easier to find those small loops that tend to get lost. I'm going to go around the loops in here. And between the first and last. It's optional, but it does help me to keep track of those tiny loops at the edges. Okay, I'm going to continue to purl this round. Okay, so I have finished all of the repeats of my purl 1 knit 1 rounds, and you can see that this has grown quite a bit. And now it's time to begin the heel, and we're going to make the heel just like we did the toe, through decreasing and increasing using German short rows. So we're going to go ahead and start on peg 1. We'll purl all the way around, and instead of going to just the middle, we're going to continue to this one, and we'll purl to this peg, and then we'll German short row this one, which means we'll knit it first, and then pull the yarn around in front of it, and then we'll turn and we'll knit back. We'll pass peg number 1, and we'll knit to this peg. Then we'll German short row this one, which is knit it, and then pull the yarn in front and tug. Then we'll purl back to this one, and then we'll GSR this one. Then we'll knit back to this one, and we'll GSR this one. And we'll continue to do that until we've put German short row stitches on these pegs on this side, and on these pegs on this side. And then we'll begin increasing the same way that we did the toe. Okay, I've finished forming the heel, so I have decreased and then increased, and then I purled back so that I'm ready to start working again in the round with peg number 1. So what I like to do at this point is, if you have an adjustable loom, you can do this. If you have a fixed loom, don't worry about this part. But to make the fit a little more comfortable and a little more snug for my foot, I like to decrease a couple of stitches, and you can decrease 2 to 4 stitches, and where I like to make the decrease is right here where we started increasing and decreasing. It helps to take care of any little holes that you might have. So you just lift the stitch off of this peg and move it over to that one, and I'm going to walk the rest of these stitches down. Then you can go underneath or to the sides or wherever your sliders are set up, and just loosen that up so that it can move around a little bit more easily. I'm going to move this over and start moving stitches over from the sliders. To help give us a little more space here. Hold on to that stitch. That stitch here. This can be a bit fiddly when you're not decreasing exactly where the sliders meet, but that's okay. We'll work with it. So now that should give us enough leeway or ease inside of those stitches to do what we want to do, which is basically put this stitch under this one. So we're going to pick this one up, move it again, and we're going to pick this one up and put this one on this peg and put this one on this peg. I know that's kind of a bit fiddly, but so if you visualize it, we moved this one on top of this one, and we moved this one on top of this one, and then we're sliding everything else down. And you can see that now all of the other stitches are in place. We can just tighten that back up. Make sure that it's lined up with the row, with the other stitches, and we can tighten it back up. So when we get to these two pegs, we'll just knit these two stitches over together. So we're going to do one round of knitting. And now it's time to bind off. So I wrapped the working yarn around my pegs that I used 3 times, and then you can just go ahead and snip that and then unwrap it. And we want to do a stretchy bind off. And the way I like to do this is you take your tail, and you can do this with a tapestry needle or your hook. I prefer the hook. And so you're going to go into you're going to skip your first stitch, go to the next stitch, and you're going to go up through your loop, grab your tail, and bring it all the way through, all the way down through. So if you're using a tapestry needle, just insert your needle straight down and pull it through. Then we're going to go over to our skipped peg, which is the first peg, and we're going to scoop down as if to purl, pick up that tail, and pull it all the way through. So again, if you're using a tapestry needle, you would simply go up and through these stitches. Okay, so we carry on. We're going to skip a peg, go in and scoop down to pull that yarn, that tail down through it. Then we're going to go over to the one that we skipped, go in like to purl, grab our tail, and pull it all the way through that stitch. Again, we skip a peg, we go to the next peg, scoop down to pull the tail through, go to the one we skipped, go in as if to purl, scoop up that tail, and pull it through. You're going to go ahead and continue that all the way around. When you get back to the point where you're back to the first peg, where if you skip this peg you'll be working into the first peg, you want to go ahead and do that because each peg you want to work the yarn through twice. So we'll scoop down and grab that, and then we'll go back into the one that we skipped and pull the yarn through that one, and there we are, finished with our bind off. So all of the pegs have been bound off, and now we simply remove the stitches from the pegs. And we can take our slipper sock off of the loom. And this is what it looks like coming straight off of the loom. It's a little bit stretched out and a little funny looking because we still need to finish closing up the toe, and we need to give all of these stitches a tug. You can see that they look pretty loopy and stretched out, so what we're going to do is simply take them and stretch them like this. This is an extra long tail, so I'm going to go ahead and snip that off to weave it in later. But you can just go around your sock. And don't forget to go up the sides. And across the back. And you can see how it's really starting to stretch out quite a bit bigger than it was when we took it off the loom at first. It's turned into a nice little slipper sock for us, with all of those stitches stretched out and put into place. See, here's a good example of really stretched out, and you tug on them and they kind of go into position the way they're supposed to look. So this is looking more like the stocking that we want, with everything kind of stretched out and into place. So now we'll want to close the toe, and to do that we want to look for the part that has our tail coming off of it and go to the opposite side. So this is the side where we're going to start making those loops much smaller, and we're going to start tightening it up over here. So what I like to do is kind of reach inside here and find my smallest loop and kind of pull on that a little bit, and you can see that this one here is the one that's moving. So I'm going to pull that until that kind of snugs down. And then since I pulled out this way, I'm going to pull on the top, and that will show me the next one that needs to be pulled from the bottom. Or from the top. I guess it depends on how you're looking at it. Then since I pulled on this part of the loop, I'm going to pull on this part to find my next one. And at this point, these loops are pretty big now, so I'm going to go ahead and remove my marker that was holding them. You can see that this one's moving, so I need to pull this out. And then I will be pulling from this side. This is the one that's moving, so I go ahead and pull on this one. And I'll pull from here. And you can kind of see which order they go in. They're pretty easy to find. And there's the toe all nice and closed. And it's quite invisible. So as with the bind off, I like to go ahead and just cut a portion of this tail off and take the rest of all of this cast on tail to the side, and then I'll be able to use just this part to weave in. And there's our sock. All nice and finished, except for weaving in our two ends. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. I'm going to make sure that I don't stab into the same place that this tail is coming out of, but just to the side of it. Go ahead and insert that and fill it with my finger, and then pull it through so that the tail is now on the inside of the sock and not on the outside. And then we can go ahead and put the sock inside out, which is pretty much exactly the same as the outside. If you like your outside better, I guess you could just use that. Into these back loops. And just follow the stitching, going in and out of the same stitch twice. And after you've got a few stitches, then you can go ahead and snip off the rest of your tail. You don't want to pull that too tightly when you're weaving in, otherwise you're going to end up with squished up stitches, which isn't a good look. Now we'll weave in our tail on the cuff. Go ahead and put our tapestry needle onto the yarn. And I'm going to just reach over and go down through this little set of stitches here, just to kind of finish off the top. Then I'm going to weave into, actually this is easier for me to do it upside down this way. I'm going to turn it upside down. There we go. I'm going to just weave in to the backs of these loops here. And then I'm going to give that a little tug. Go up into this stitch, and back down out of this one, and then weave into the stitches next to it. Pull that down and give it a tug. Make sure that it's not getting too tight. And then to finish it off, I'm going to go back around and weave back into some of them on this side. And that's pretty well anchored in there, even with this yarn that's kind of slippery. And I can snip that off. And put my stocking back inside out. Or right side round, I guess. And there we are, our finished sock. Here's one side and the other. And you can see that it's got a nice deep heel, a lot of stretch. Be very comfortable for a lot of sizes.